All right, we're back with every Major League Baseball player ever, starting with the letter G today. We're going to go and start with Jason Gabbard, Gabe, Armando Gabino, Frank Gambler, Gabe Gabler, John Gabler, Ken Gables, Lane Gabelson, Hunter Gaddis, John Gaddy, Gus Gatson, Eddie Gazdel, Gary Gady, Brent Gaff, Fabian Goffkey, Matt Gage, Phil Gagliano, Ralph Gagliano, Eric Anjay, Greg Ganjay, Ed Gangier, Chuck Gagnon, Drew Gagnon, Eddie Gallard, Dell Gaynor, Jay Gaynor, Joe Gaines, Jonas Gaines, Nemo Gaines, Ty Gainley, Fred Gazer, Steve Gachkowski, Dan Gekeller, and Augie Gallen, Andres Galarga, Armando Galarga, Bob Galasso, Mick Gallagher, Rich Gal, Ricky Gal, Danny Galhouse, John Gal, Al Gallagher, Bill Gallagher, Bob Gallagher, Cam Gallagher, Dave Gallagher, Doug Gallagher, Ed Gallagher, Gil Gallagher, Jackie Gallagher, Joe Gallagher, John Gallagher, Sean Gallagher, Shorty Gallagher, William Gallagher, Giovanni Gallardo, Stan Gal, Mike Gallego, Giovanni Gallego, Zach Gallen, Bert Gallia, John Gilligan, Pete Galligan, Phil Gallivan, Joey Gallo, Mike Gallo, Joey Gallo retired, Chuck Galloway, Isaac Galloway, Jim Galloway, Valvino Galvez, Candido Galvez, Jim Galvin, John Galvin, Lou Galvin, Pud Galvin, Hall of Famer, and former Buffalo Bison. 1875 to 1892. Freddie Galvis, Bob Gamble, John Gamble, Lee Gamble, Oscar Gamble, William Gamble, Eddie Gamboa, Ben Gamble, Matt Gamble, Domingo Gummies, Margaro Gummies, Death Gammons, Gus Gandalarillis, Chick Gandil, Bob Gandy, Bob Ganley, Bill Gannon, Gussie Gannon, Joe Gannon, Judy Gans, John Gant, Ron Gant, Joe Gentlebean, Jim Gatner, Babe Gansel, Charlie Gansel, John Gansel, Eddie Garabalto, Gerson Garabalto, Joe Garagolio, Keith Gargazoa, Victor Garate, Bob Garbark, Mike Garbark, Bob Garber, Gene Garber, Barboa Garbry, Alex Garbowski, Frank Garcias, Rich Garcias, Aldolis Garcia, Adonis Garcia, Amari Garcia, Anderson Garcia, Angel Garcia, Armas Garcia, Avisali Garcia, Brian Garcia, Carlos Garcia, Chano Garcia, Chico Garcia, Christian Garcia, Casina Garcia, Damoso Garcia, Daniel Garcia, Danny Garcia, D.V. Garcia, Demis Garcia, Edgar Garcia, Freddie Garcia, Greg Garcia, Guillermo Garcella, Harvey Garcia, Jamie Garcia, Justin Garcia, Jason Garcia, Jesse Garcia, Jose Garcia, Karim Garcia, Kiko Garcia, Leo Garcia, Luri Garcia, Luis Garcia, Luis Garcia, Luis Garcia, Luis Garcia, Luis Garcia Jr., Miguel Garcia, Miguel Garcia, Mike Garcia, Oneki Garcia, Pedro Garcia, Ralph Garcia, Ramon Garcia, Reynaldo Garcia, Rico Garcia, Robel Garcia, Robert Garcia, Ronnie Garcia, Rosman Garcia, Silvo Garcia, Willie Garcia, Yimi Garcia, Norma Garcia Para, El Gardella, Danny Gardella, Ron Gardenhire, Nick Gardenwine, Art Gardner, Mike Gardner, Gardner, Alex Gardner, Art Gardner, Bill Gardner, Billy Gardner, Brett Gardner, Chris Gardner, Earl Gardner, Gabe Gardner, Glenn Gardner, Harry Gardner, Jeff Gardner, Jelly Gardner, Jim Gardner, Larry Gardner, Lee Gardner, Mark Gardner, Ping Gardner, Ray Gardner, Rob Gardner, Wes Gardner, Gary, Bill Garfield, Art Garibaldi, Bob Garibaldi, Danielle Garibay, Ryan Garco, John Garland, Lou Garland, Wayne Garland, Kyle Garlick, Mike Garman, Debs Garms, Justin Garmio, Cole Garner, Percy Garner, Phil Garner, Willie Garoni, Ralph Gar, Scott Garrett, Adrian Garrett, excuse me, Amir Garrett, Brexton Garrett, Clarence Garrett, Greg Garrett, Reed Garrett, Spike Garrett, Stone Garrett, Tom Garrett, Wayne Garrett, Gil Garrido, Cecil Garrett, Cliff Garrison, Ford Garrison, Steve Garrison, Webster Garrison, Hank Garrity, Jim Gary, Ryan Garrett, Mitch Garver, current Mariners backup catcher, Ned Garver, Steve Garvey, Garvin, Jerry Garvin, Ned Garvin, Charles Gary, Justin Garza, Matt Garza, Ralph Garza, Harry Gasper, Rob Gasper, Mickey Gasper, Charlie Gassaway, Robert Gasser, Dave Gassner, John Gass, Tom Gastal, Ed Gasfield, Alex Gastone, Cito Gastone, Mick Gastone, Robert Gastone, Welcome Gastone, Hank Castrite, Brett Gates, Joe Gates, Mike Gates, Aubrey Gatewood, Bill Gatewood, Ernest Gatewood, Joey Garthwaite, Frank Gatens, Evan Gatens, John Goff, Jim Goddle, Chad Claughton, Mike Gal, Kevin Gossman, Doc Gautreaux, Sid Gautrex, Sam Gavaligo, Gavin, George Gaw, Herbert Gay, Willie Gay, Mike Gazello, Dale Gear, Lloyd Gearhart, Ginty Gearin, Corey Gearin, Bob Geary, Jeff Gary, Huck Gary, Bob Gebhard, Pete Gebry, and Jim Jetties, Elmer Gedeon, Joe Gedeon, Rich Gedman, Count Gedney, Dylan Gee, Johnny Gee, Rich Gee, Sammy Gee, Tom Gee, Billy Gear, Josh Gear, Charlie Geggis, Lou Gehrig, 1923 to 1939 Hall of Famer, Hank Gehrig, 1907 to 1908. I don't know if they're related. Charlie Gehringer, Hall of Famer, 1924 to 1942. Paul Garum, Phil Geyer, Harry Geiger, Dave Gizell, Vern Geiser, Bill Geis, Emil Geis, Charlie Geibert, John Geiner, Zach Galoff, Steve Gelch, Joe Genowich, Frank Gennon, Scooter Gennett, George Genovese, Jim Gentile, Sam Gentile, Craig Gentry, Gary Gentry, Harvey Gentry, Roof Gentry, Tyler Gentry, Alex George, Bill George, Charles George, Chris George, Chris George, John George, Lefty George, Oscar Georgie, Ben Garrigy, Alfonso Gerard, Dave Gerald, Frank Gerber, Joey Gerber, Mike Gerber, Wally Gerber, George Gerberman, Bob Green, Joe Gerhardt, Rusty Gerhardt, Ken Gerhardt, Al Gernhauser, George Gherkin, Steve Gherkin, Johnny Gerlich, Dominico Herman, I believe he threw a perfect game and then had alcohol issues. Esteban Herman, Franklin German, Franklin Herman, Les German, Justin Hermano, Gonzalez Herman, Ed Gerner, Dick Jernit, Cesar Geronimo, Lou Genterich, Joey Garoth, Sammy Gervasio, Lefty Gervis, Doc Jessler, Charlie Gessner, Al Gettle, Charlie Getting, Tom Gettinger, Brian Geddes, Jake Getman, Chris Getz, Gus Getz, Pretzels, Getzlin, what? Rube Geyer, Chappie Gagan, Pasty Garrity, Tony Gethley, Bob Giambardo, Jason Giambi, Jerry Giambi, Trent Giambrone, Ray Gianelli, Joe Gianni, Joe Gerard, Tony Geronto, Johnny Giavalanta, Ian Gibbo, Joe Gibbon, Jay Gibbons, John Gibbons, Walter Gibbons, Jake Gibbs, Steve Gibraltar Gibson, Bob Gibson, Hall of Famer, Bob Gibson, not Hall of Famer, 1983 to 1987, Kate Gibson, Charlie Gibson, Derek Gibson, Frank Gibson, George Gibson, Josh Gibson, Hall of Famer, Kurt Gibson, Kyle Gibson, Norbert Gibson, Paul Gibson, Robert Gibson, Russ Gibson, Sam Gibson, Whitney Gibson, George Brick, Brett Gideon, Jim Gideon, Joe G. Bell, Floyd G. Bell, Paul G. L., Dan G. C. Bob Giggle, Norm Gigon, Benji Gill, Jeremino Gill, Gus Gill, Jerry Gill, Luis Gill, Andy Gilbert, Bill Gilbert, Billy Gilbert, Buddy Gilbert, Charlie Gilbert, Harry Gilbert, Jack Gilbert, Joe Gilbert, John Gilbert, Larry Gilbert, Olivia Gilbert, Current Mariner, Mark Gilbert, Pete Gilbert, Sean Gilbert, Toothy Gilbert, Tyler Gilbert, Wally Gilbert, Lucas Gilbert, Rod Gilbert, Bill Gilbert, Dennis Gilchrist, Don Glee, Giles, Brian Giles, George Giles, Ken Giles, Marcus Giles, Jason Gillian, Hugh Gilligan, George Gillum, Frank Gill Hooley, Bernard Geike, Bob Gilks, Ed Gill, George Gill, Katie Gill, Jim Gill, Johnny Gill, Warren Gill, Connor Gillespie, Logan Gillespie, Sam Gillen, Tom Gillen, Carden Gillenwater, Clairol Gillenwater, Tom Giles, Bob Giuseppe, Cole Giuseppe, Henry Giuseppe, John Giuseppe, Patrick Giuseppe, Paul Giuseppe, Jim Gillian, Penn Gilliard, Paul Gifford, Barney Gilligan, Jack Gilligan, Grant Gillis, Connor Gillespie, Murray Gillespie, George Gilpatrick, Jim Gilman, Pitt Gilman, Sean Gilmartin, Frank Gilmore, Grover Gilmore, Lefty Gilmore, Len Gilmore, Thomas Gilmore, Gilpin, Henry Gilroy, John Gilroy, Hal Gibson, Luther Gillard, Andres Jimenez, Chris Jimenez, Hector Jimenez, Caleb Gindy, Billy Ging, Joe Gingras, Kevin Grinkle, Jakey Gin, Tinsley Gin, Joe Ginsberg, Keith Ginter, Matt Ginter, Luis Giolito, Al Gianfrido, Tommy Giordano, Ed Giovanni, Alvin Gibson, Charles Gibson, Ted Gibson, Sawyer Gibson Long, Charlie Gerard, Joe Girardi, Chad Gerardo, Willie Gibson Arthur, Chris Gissel, Chris Gittens, Tony Giuliani, Dave Gizuti, Brian Gibbons, Michael Gibbons, Oscar Gibbons, Jim Glad, Dan Gladden, Fred Gladding, Fred Glade, Buck Gladman, Gladney, Ronaldo Gladeau, John Glazer, Doug Glanville, Norman Glasser, Tyler Glassnow, Ben Glaspie, Carl Glass, Tom Glass, Jack Glass, Keith Glauber, Troy Klaus, Luke Glavinich, Tommy Glaviano, Mike Levine, Tom Levine, Hall of Famer, Ralph Glaze, Whitney Glazer, Whitey Glazer, Bill Gleason, Billy Gleason, Harry Gleason, Jack Gleason, Joe Gleason, Kid Gleason, Roy Gleason, Jerry Don Cleaton, Jim Gleason, Frank Blake, Bob Glenavin, Martin Glendon, Bob Glenn, Brad Glenn, Ed Glenn, Hap Glenn, Henry Glenn, Hubert Glenn, Joe Glenn, John Glenn, Stanley Glenn, Sal Gelato, George Gelantis, Ross Road, Norm Glockson, Al Glasso, Clover, Gary Clover, Coda Clover, Clover, Bill Glynn, Ed Glynn, Brian Glynn, Jock Gore, Jimmy Goebel, John Gognor, John Goder, Johnny Godby, Joe Goddard, Graham Gottfried, Manuel Gordinez, Zach Godley, Jose Godagoy, John Godwin, Tyler Godwin, Jake Gobert, Ed Goebel, Billy Goebel, Eric Godel, Tyler Godel, George Soaks, John Goats, Jerry Goff, David Goforth, Chuck Goggin, Bill Gogolewski, Luis Gorhaza, Brett Gore, Walter Goins, Ryan Coins, Brad Goldberg, Cloyd Golden, Jim Golden, Mike Golden, Roy Golden, Goldie, Jonah Goldman, Gordon Goldsberry, Walt Goldsberry, Paul Goldsmith. Wow, he's 15th year. Fred Goldsmith, Paul Goldsmith, Wally Goldsmith, Izzy Goldstein, Lon Goldstein, Pernell Goldie, Stan Goitz, Fred Gola, Mike Gola, Greg Golson, Dave Goltz, Watt Golvin, Austin Gomber, Brandon Gomes, Johnny Gomes, Wayne Gomes, Ian Gomes, Alex Gomez, Carlos Gomez, Chile Gomez, Chris Gomez, David Gomez, Hector Gomez, Jamar Gomez, Lefty Gomez, Hall of Famer, Leo Gomez, Luis Gomez, Mauro Gomez, Miguel Gomez, Pat Gomez, Preston Gomez, Randy Gomez, Roberto Gomez, Ruben Gomez, Sijo Gomez, Jorge Gomez, Jesse Gonder, Stephen Gonslaves, Tony Gonsolin, Dan Gonzalez, Joe Gonzalez, Larry Gonzalez, Marco Gonzalez, Nick Gonzalez, Rene Gonzalez, Vince Gonzalez, Adrian Gonzalez, Alberto Gonzalez, Alex Gonzalez, Alfredo Gonzalez, Andy Gonzalez, Carlos Gonzalez, Chichi Gonzalez, Denny Gonzalez, Dick E. Gonzalez, actually, Edgar Gonzalez, Enrique Gonzalez, Eric Gonzalez, Suebio Gonzalez, Fernando Gonzalez, Gabe Gonzalez, Karimi Gonzalez, Herman Nazir, Gio Gonzalez, Jose Gonzalez, Juan Gonzalez, Julio Gonzalez, Roniel Gonzalez, Luis Gonzalez, Marwin Gonzalez, Miranda Gonzalez, Miguel Gonzalez, Mike Gonzalez, Orlando Gonzalez, Oscar Gonzalez, Pedro Gonzalez, Ruel Gonzalez, Romy Gonzalez, Servino Gonzalez, Victor Contreras, Victor Gonzalez, Wiki Gonzalez, Charlie Gooch, Johnny Gooch, Lee Gooch, Andrew Good, Gene Good, Ralph Good, Wilbur Good, Herb Goodall, John Goodall, Dwight Gooden, Ernest Gooden, Bill Goodendo, Mike Goodfellow, Billy Goodman, Hunter Goodman, Ivel Goodman, Jake Goodman, Joe Goodrich, Nico Goodrun, Ed Goodson, Art Goodwin, Brian Goodwin, Clyde Goodwin, Curtis Goodwin, Danny Goodwin, Jim Goodwin, Mari Goodwin, Pep Goodwin, Tom Goodwin, Nick Goody, Ray Goolsby, Greg Rosen, or Greg Goosen, Glenn Gorbis, Ray Gardinier, Gordon, Alex Gordon, Brian Gordon, Russ Gordon, Dalton Gordon, Colton Gordon, Dan Gordon, Herman Gordon, Joe Gordon, Hall of Famer, Keith Gordon, Mike Gordon, Nick Gordon, Sid Gordon, Tanner Gordon, Tom Gordon, George Gore, Mackenzie Gore, Terrence Gore, Reed Gorecki, Rick Gorecki, Charlotte Gorin, Rob Gorinsky, Herb Gorman, Howie Gorman, Jack Gorman, Nolan Gorman, Thomas Gorman, Tom Gorman, Joe Gormley, Nick Burnell, Hank Cormicky, Johnny Corsica, Matt Gorski, Johnny Gorl, Tom Gorzelani, Anthony Ghost, Tuffy Gozenwich, Jim Godrich, Goose Gosselin, Hall of Famer, Mike Gosling, Howie Goss, Rich Gossett, Hall of Famer, Phil Gosselin, Daniel Gossett, Dick Gossett, Julio Gote, Ruben Gote, Jim Goat, Trevor Gott, Austin Ludo, Ted Goulet, Al Gold, Charlie Gold, Harold Gold, Nick Ghoulish, Claude Guzzi, Hank Gowdy, Larry Gow, Maro Gozo, Billy Graberwitz, Brad Graber, John Grabau, Al Grombowski, Jason Grombowski, Johnny Grombowski, Reggie Grombowski, Earl Grace, Joe Grace, Mark Grace, Matt Grace, Mike Grace, Willie Grace, Gordon Grassapio, Frank Grassapie, John Grady, Mike Grady, Fred Graff, John Graff, Luis Graff, Mike Graff, Tony Graffino, Blaney Graham, Burt Graham, Bill Graham, Charlie Graham, Dan Graham, Dennis Graham, J.R. Graham, Jack Graham, James Graham, Kyle Graham, Lee Graham, Moonlight Graham, Oscar Graham, Peaches Graham, Ray Graham, Skinny Graham, Tiny Graham, Tyler Graham, Wayne Graham, Bill Granamy, Joe Gary, Alex Herman, Tommy Gramley, Alex Bramas, Hank Grant, Yasmani Grandi, Curtis Granderson, Jack Graney, Jeff Granger, Wayne Granger, Zach Grant, Eddie Grant, George Grant, Jim Grant, Jimmy Grant, Leroy Grant, Mark Grant, Mudcast Grant, Tom Grant, George Grantman, Rick Grabthin, Lou Grassmick, Mickey Grasso, Don Great, Mark Grader, Belker Gratterall, Bruiser Gratterall, Juan Gratterall, Billy Grollich, Kendall Graveman, Graves, Bob Graves, Brett Graves, Danny Graves, Frank Graves, Joe Graves, Sid Graves, Gray, 8 Gray, Bill Gray, Chappie Gray, Charlie Gray, Chesley Gray, Chummy Gray, Dave Gray, Dick Gray, Dolly Gray, Gary Gray, Jeff Gray, Jam Gray, Johnny Gray, Hall, John Gray. Hosea Gray, Lorenzo Gray, Mitt Gray, Pete Gray, Sam Gray, Sonny Gray, Stan Gray, Ted Gray, Tristan Gray, Willie Gray, Eli Gerba, Bill Greason, John Greason, Craig Greba Green, Andy Green, Chad Green, Chris Green, Curtis Green, Dallas Green, Danny Green, David Green, Dick Green, Ed Green, Fred Green, Gary Green, Gene Green, Grant Green, Harvey Green, Honey Green, Jason Green, Jim Green, Joe Green, Julius Green, Lenny Green, Leslie Green, Nick Green, Pumpsy Green, Scarborough Green, Sean Green, Steve Green, Taylor Green, Tyler Green, Willie Green, Zach Green, Adam Greenberg, Hank Greenberg, Hall of Famer, Al Green, Charlie Green, Connor Green, Hunter Green, Joe Green, June Green, Khalil Green, Nelson Green, Patty Green, Rick Green, Riley Green, Shane Green, Todd Green, Tommy Green, Tyler Green, Willie Green, Kent Greenfield, Jim Greengrass, Victor Greenridge, John Greening, Mike Greenwell, Bill Greenwood, Bob Greenwood, Nick Greenwood, Brian Greer, Ed Greer, Kenny Greer, Rusty Greer, Luke Gregerson, Dave Gregg, Cal Gregg, Kevin Gregg, Tommy Gregg, Lynn Gregg, Tom Gregorio, Dee Gregorius, Frank Gregory, Howie Gregory, Lee Gregory, Paul Gregory, Pete Gregory, Bill Brief, Grayson Griner, Zach Brinke. Zach Brinke is out of the league for 2 years. Seth Dreisinger, Ed Greminger, Buddy Grant, Bill Greville, Ray Gray, Robbie Inch, Randall Reachick, Claude Greer, Kristen Beck, Ben Grieve, Tom Grieve, Lee Griffith, Ken Griffey Sr., Ben Griffey Jr., Hall of Famer, 1989 to 2010, Marist, Legend, AJ Griffin, Alfredo Griffin, Clarence Griffin, Doug Griffin, Foster Griffin, Hank Griffin, Ivy Griffin, John Ford Griffin, Marty Griffin, Mick Griffin, Mike Griffin, Pat Griffin, Hug Griffin, Robert Griffin, Sandy Griffin, Silas Griffin, Thomas Griffin, Tom Griffin, Brett Griffin, Griffith, Clark Griffith, Hall of Famer, Daryl Griffith, Frank Griffith, Ted Griffith, Tommy Griffith, Jeremy Griffiths, Alex Griggs, Art Griggs, Hal Griggs, Wiley Griggs, Denver Grigsby, Guido Grilly, Jackson Grill, Steve Grilly, Bob Grimm, John Grimm, Adolphus Grimes, Burley Grimes, Hall of Famer, 1916 to 34, Ed Grimes, John Grimes, Oscar Grimes, Ray Grimes, Roy Grimes, Charlie Grimm, Justin Grimm, Myron Grimshaw, Jason Grimsley, Ross Grimsley, Dan Griner, Trent Grisham, Lee Grisham, Marquise Grisham, Mark Grisham, Bob Grisham, Dick Grote, Connie Grove, Johnny Grozicki, Heidi Grove, Lou Grove, Steve Gromek, Lee Gromek, Bob Groom, Buddy Groom, George Gross, Sart, John Groshans, Howard Grossloss, Don Gross, Emil Gross, Gabe Gross, Greg Gross, Kevin Gross, Kip Gross, William Gross, Harley Grossman, Robbie Grossman, Jerry Grove, Jeff Grove, Ernest Grove, Ernie Grove, Johnny Grove, Matt Grove, Zach Brooks, Grove, Lefty Grove, Hall of Famer, 1925 to 1941, Michael Grove, Orville Grove, Charlie Grover, Roy Grover, Harvey Grubb, Johnny Grubb, Tom Grubbs, Frankie Grube, Jarrett Grube, Henry Gruber, Kelly Gruber, Mark Grube Zinnilack, Davey Grumman, Ken Grunt, Al Grunwald, Kevin Berspoke, Sid Kryska, Mike Vizzini, Joe Grisenda, Robert Jesselman, Michael Guipe, Cecilia Guante, Eddie Guardo, Creighton Gubanich, Mark Kubitska, Marv Gudot, Raymond Gudon, Sean Gunter, Joelis Guerrera, Javi Guerrera, Junior Guerrera, Marcelino Guerrera, Mike Guerrera, Alex Guerrero, Gabriel Guerrero, Juan Guerrero, Luis Guerrero, Mario Guerrero, Pedro Guerrero, Terrion Guerrero, Vladimir Guerrero Sr., 1996 to 2011 Hall of Famer, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., 19 to 2025, Wilton Guerrero, Matt Guerrero, Taylor Guerreri, Whitney Guace, Lee Gallman, Carlos Guevara, Giamar Gueva, Ron Gildry, Aaron Dwell, Felix Guilibe, Juan Gulibe, Taylor Gulibe, Carlos Guillian, Jose Guillian, Ozzy Guillian, Luis Gilmore, Preston Gilmont, Bobby Gwyndon, Ben Quinney, Skip Gwynn, Ben Gwinty, Lefty Wise, Lou Gisto, Mike Gullen, Brad Golden, Don Gullet, Nap Gully, Tom Gully, Ted Gullet, Bill Gullickson, Glenn Gulliver, Ad Gumbert, Billy Gumbert, Harry Gumbert, Gums, Dave Gumbert, Randy Gumbert, Eric Gunderson, Red Gunkel, Fred Gunkel, Petty Gun, High Gunning, Tom Gunning, Joe Gunson, Larry Gura, Jason Gurka, Earl Gurley, Lourdes Gurriel Jr., Willie Gurriel, Taylor Bouchou, Ernie Guth, John Del Gustav, Frankie Gustine, Ryan Gusto, Bucky Guth, Charlie Guth, Dalton Guthrie, Jeremy Guthrie, Mark Guthrie, Cesar Gutierrez, Franklin Gutierrez, JC Gutierrez, Jackie Gutierrez, Jose Gutierrez, Kevin Gutierrez, Ricky Gutierrez, Vladimir Gutierrez, Don Gutenrich, Brandon Geyer, Angel Guzman, Christian Guzman, Dominic Guzman, Edwards Guzman, Freddie Guzman, Geraldo Guzman, Jesus Guzman, Joel Guzman, Johnny Guzman, Jorge Guzman, Jose Guzman, Juan Guzman, Ronaldo Guzman, Santiago Guzman, Doug Guzwer, Guaz, Marcus Gwynn, Chris Gwynn, Tony Gwynn, Hall of Famer, Tony Gwynn, not Hall of Famer, 2006 to 2014, Jed Georgi, and Dick Gleiselman. That is a total of over 1,200 players for the letter um, G with 1,251. The next video will be H with 1,705.
And again, thank you for tuning into the videos. Don't forget that you can also see me on Patreon at Sammy5436, where it's $1 a month. I also am seeable on Instagram at Sammy5436. TikTok at Sammy5436. I'm on Blue Sky at Sammy5436, though I don't use that often. I believe I'm on Tumblr at Sammy5436, but I haven't used that in at least a year. And you can find me at my business email, thetrapezoidtalks5436 at gmail.com. Any information you need to send to those business emails will be looked at. I generally look at my business email on Wednesdays and Sundays, so just do be advised that I do not always have the ability to respond immediately, but if you do send an email to my business email, and as long as it's not offensive, I will respond if it's something I'm interested in with something positive, and if it's something I'm not interested in, I will thank you for your email and go ahead and say that there may be a future opportunity for us to collaborate if that's something you're interested in.